Hi class, and welcome to chapter 16 on the digestive system. So digestion is the breakdown of any large organic molecule into a smaller molecule that can be absorbed through the digestive tract, mainly your stomach and small and large intestine. The digestive system performs the task of digestion. Food will be taken into the digestive system where it is enzymatically broken down into smaller and smaller particles for absorption by the GI tract. So the functions of your digestive system are to ingest solids, liquids, organic molecules, absorb nutrients, and eliminate wastes. Here are the organs of the digestive system. You can see how the organs are all connected in one continuous long tube. Those are the main organs of the digestive system. And then you have accessory organs, which are your salivary glands, your liver, your gallbladder, and your pancreas, which secrete enzymes into the digestive tract. And we'll go over all the organs of the digestive system now in order. So the digestive system consists of the digestive tract plus specific associated organs. It's also referred to as the GI or the GI tract, and the tract is one long tube from the mouth to the anus. So the tract consists of your oral cavity, your pharynx, your esophagus, your stomach, your small and large intestines, the rectum, and then the anus. The digestive system includes some associated organs not directly associated with digestive tract, but have ducts that lead into the tract. And these associated organs will be your salivary glands that will produce saliva into the mouth, your liver, your gallbladder, and your pancreas. And they all produce some sort of enzyme that helps to digest or break down larger pieces of food or molecules. The layers of the tract wall are also termed tunics. The mucosa layer is the innermost layer that secretes mucus. The submucosa is above the mucosa and will contain blood vessels, nerves, and small glands. The muscularis will be above that layer, and it will be the longitudinal, circular, and oblique muscles that help move or propel the food along. And then the serosa or adventitia is the outermost layer. The peritoneum will be present, that's called serosa. And if there's no peritoneum present, then we call it adventitia. So here are just a look at the digestive tract tunics or layers to them. You can see here kind of the innermost layer will be the mucosa, then the submucosa, then the muscularis, the muscular layer, and then the serosa. And you can see where blood vessels and nerves are, lymphatic nodules, intestinal glands, glands in the submucosa. Then you can see the plexus of nerves traveling right underneath the muscularis layer and through the muscularis layer because it will be innervated to contract the food. And then the mesentery, which kind of holds your small and large intestines together in one place. So mesenteries are connective tissue of organs in the abdominal cavity. And we're talking about the peritoneum here, which is a layer of smooth epithelial tissue, and it's made up of your mesenteries and then the lesser and greater omentum. The lesser omentum is a mesentery connecting the lesser curvature of the stomach to the liver and the diaphragm, and the greater omentum is the mesentery connecting the greater curvature of the stomach to the transverse colon and the posterior body wall. So here's a look at the peritoneum, again, this layer of connective tissue, and then the mesenteries, which kind of hold all the organs together within the digestive tract. The oral cavity is your first part of your digestive system. Here we have stratified squamous epithelia. The salivary glands will produce saliva, which will break down carbohydrates into glucose. Your salivary glands also keep your mouth clean, and they help with dissolving and moistening the food. Amylase is the big salivary enzyme that breaks down carbohydrates, and lysozyme is a salivary enzyme that is active against bacteria. The tongue will house taste buds and mucus. And here's a look at the oral cavity, the different types of teeth that help to mechanically crunch or break apart the tube, or the food, your uvula in the back, soft and hard palate. And then there's the tongue, the frenulum of the tongue, and then different openings of the submandibular ducts are shown there. So then you have 32 adult teeth, incisors, canine, premolars, molars, and wisdom. You have 20 primary teeth, those are your baby teeth, And the tooth has its own anatomy that we'll see in a slide, the picture of a tooth. Each has a crown, a cusp, a neck, and a root. The center of the tooth is the pulp cavity. Enamel is the hard covering that protects against abrasions that your teeth often face. And enamel is the hardest substance in the body. Cavities are breakdown of enamel by acids from bacteria. So here's a look at adult teeth on the left, and you can see baby teeth on the right and where each are located. The wisdom teeth are located way in the back. Some of you might still have your wisdom teeth. I do. But then you can see here your central incisors, lateral incisors, canines, and then going through the premolars. And here takes a look at where the baby teeth come in, and it gives you a general month as to when the teeth come in. Here's the anatomy of the tooth. The pulp cavity has the vessels and nerves in it. Here's the enamel with a cusp labeling the top of that, the dentin. The root of the tooth lies below the surface. The neck is the area between the root, and then the crown is the part of the tooth that is exposed. The palate in your mouth is the roof of the oral cavity, and the hard palate is the anterior part, and the soft palate is the posterior part. Your soft palate will elevate when you swallow food so that food doesn't go into your nasal cavity. Then here are your submandibular glands, your salivary glands. You have three: submandibular, sublingual, and the parotid, and they will be very important in producing saliva that contain enzymes to break down food. Mumps will be an inflammation of the parotid gland, and the parotid gland is located right here. It kind of lies on top of the masseter muscle. You can also see where the ducts come out of each of the salivary glands into the mouth to bring their salivary enzymes to the mouth, the oral cavity. Then your pharynx is the throat. It connects the mouth to the esophagus. It has three parts depending on which part of the pharynx we're talking about: the nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx. The esophagus is the tube that connects the pharynx to the stomach. It will transport food to the stomach and join the stomach at the cardiac opening. Heartburn occurs when gastric juices regurgitate into the esophagus. Heartburn can be caused by caffeine, smoking, or eating or drinking in excess. The process of swallowing, there's two phases. You have a voluntary phase where the mass of food, which we call a bolus, is formed in the mouth and pushed into your oropharynx. You guys control that action. And then the pharyngeal phase is the swallowing reflex initiated when the bolus stimulates receptors in the oropharynx. And the esophageal phase is when food moves from the pharynx to the stomach. It takes several seconds for food to move down your esophagus. And peristalsis helps in that these are the wave-like contractions that move through food through the digestive tract. Think of peristalsis kind of like squeezing a yogurt tube. That's kind of what your esophagus will do to squeeze the food down. So here are the events that occur during the three phases of swallowing, and I'll let you guys read through those. You can pause the lecture to review this on your own. Again, you have a voluntary phase, and then you have a pharyngeal phase, an esophageal phase. So again, you control the voluntary phase, the first act of pushing the bolus into the pharynx, and then the pharyngeal and esophageal phase kind of take over from there to get the food down to the stomach. Here's what peristalsis looks like. Again, it's a wave of smooth muscle relaxation and contraction that moves the bolus, allowing the digestive tract to expand and move through the digestive tract. The stomach then is located in the abdomen. It's a storage tank for food. It can hold up to 2 liters of food, which seems like a lot. Your stomach produces mucus, hydrochloric acid, which makes the stomach a very extremely acidic environment, and other protein digestive enzymes. It contains a thick mucus layer that lubricates and protects epithelial cells on the stomach wall from the acidic pH of about 3. There's 3 muscular layers to your stomach: the outer longitudinal, middle circular, and inner oblique, to produce a churning action in the stomach. Rugae are large inner folds that allow the stomach to stretch, and chyme is the paste-like substance that forms when food begins to be broken down. So we call the food, when it reaches the stomach, we call it chyme. The pyloric opening is the opening between your stomach and your small intestine. And the pyloric sphincter is a ring of smooth muscle around the pyloric opening that will open and close to allow food to pass from your stomach into the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine. Hunger pains, we're all familiar with those, I'm sure. This is when your stomach is stimulated to contract by low blood glucose levels, and it usually occurs about 12 to 24 hours after a meal. So here's a look at the anatomy and histology of the stomach. You can see the rugae, the lesser and greater curvature, the walls of the stomach. The cardiac part is the opening from the esophagus, and then the pylorus will be the ending region next to the pyloric sphincter that will control the passageway of food into the duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestine. The regulation of stomach secretions, parasympathetic stimulation, which is again that rest and digest division, will secrete gastrin. Histamine will increase stomach secretions. The cephalic is the first phase where stomach secretions are initiated by sight, smell, taste, or food thought. The gastric phase is the second phase where partially digested proteins and stretching or distension of the stomach will promote secretion. And then the intestinal is the third phase where the acidic chyme will stimulate neuronal reflexes and secretions of other hormones that will inhibit gastric secretions by negative feedback loops. So here's a look at the cephalic phase of the stomach control, where any sort of taste, smell, or thought of food will send sensations from your medulla to the stomach to secrete some of the gastric juices in the stomach itself. The gastric phase of stomach control, distension of the stomach will stimulate receptors that will initiate a parasympathetic reflex that will activate local reflexes that increase even more stomach secretions, as shown by the orange arrow. Then the intestinal phase, we have chyme, which will be picked up from chemoreceptors. The low pH, extremely acidic, will inhibit gastric secretion at this point. Secretin and choleocytokinin will be produced by the duodenum in the brown arrow, and that will decrease gastric secretions in the stomach after the stomach has done its job of digesting the food. So the movement in the stomach is done by mixing waves, which is a weak contraction that will thoroughly mix the food to form the chyme. Peristaltic waves are stronger contractions, and this will force the chyme toward and through the pyloric sphincter. Hormonal and neural mechanisms will stimulate stomach secretions, and the stomach will empty every 4 hours after a regular meal and 6 to 8 hours after a high fatty meal. So this just shows the movement of chyme through the stomach. Doesn't that look lovely? As it begins to make its way through the pyloric sphincter and then out of the duodenum, which is the first part in the small intestine. So your small intestine then measures 6 meters in length. It's the major absorptive organ. So your small intestine is where most of your nutrients will be absorbed from the chyme. It takes chyme about 3 to 5 hours to pass through your small intestine. There will be enzymes here to help further break down food, and it will contain secretions for protection against the acidity of chyme. So the duodenum is the first part of the small intestine. It's about 25 centimeters long. It contains absorptive cells, goblet cells, granular cells, and endocrine cells. It will have many microvilli and folds that help to increase surface area for absorption, and it will contain bile and pancreatic ducts that will bring bile from the gallbladder and pancreatic enzymes to help digest the food. The jejunum is the second part. It's about 2.5 meters long and absorbs nutrients. And then the ileum is the final third part of the small intestine. It's about 3.5 meters long. So here's just a look at the small intestine and how the mesentery kind of holds the small intestine together in place where it should be in the center of the large intestine, which is your colon. And this is I'm getting ahead of myself, but this is a good picture of how the jejunum attaches to the ileum, which is the first part of the large intestine. And the cecum is kind of a pouch. And then you can see your appendix coming off of the large intestine at the base. The mucosa of your small intestine is simple columnar with 4 major cell types. You have absorptive cells, which will have microvilli that produce digestive enzymes and absorb digested food. Goblet cells produce a protective mucus, and granular cells, which may help protect the intestinal epithelium from bacteria, and then endocrine cells, which produce regulatory hormones. The epithelial cells are located within tubular glands of the mucosa, and we call these the crypts of Lieberkühn at the base of the villi. Your granular and your endocrine cells are located in the bottom of the glands, and the submucosa of the duodenum will contain mucus glands called duodenal glands, which open into the base of the intestinal glands. The epithelial cells in the walls of the small intestine have enzymes bound to their free surfaces. Peptidases will enzymatically break down proteins into amino acids for absorption, and disaccharidases will enzymatically break down disaccharides, which are rings of two sugars, into monosaccharides for absorption. So the anatomy and the histology of the duodenum is really interesting because you have these villi, which will contain lacteals, blood capillaries, intestinal glands, all very kind of perfectly created for absorbing food and digesting food that's being put through it. Movement in the small intestine, mixing and propulsion of chyme are the primary mechanical events that occur. Peristaltic contractions will proceed along the length of the intestine for variable distances and cause the chyme to move along the small intestine. And segmental contractions are propagated for only short distances and mix the intestinal contents. The ileocecal sphincter is another sphincter at the junction of the ileum and the large intestine. It remains mildly contracted most of the time. Peristaltic contractions reaching the ileocecal sphincter from the small intestine cause the sphincter to relax and allow chyme to move from your small intestine into the cecum. And the valve will prevent the movement from the large intestine back into the ileum. Just like everything in the body, you want everything to flow in one direction. So here are the segmental contractions. The segments of the digestive tract will alternate between contraction and relaxation as material in brown is spread out in both directions to kind of produce mixing and contraction as it passes through the small intestine. Your liver is one of the accessory or associated organs of the digestive system. It weighs about 3 pounds. It's located in the right upper quadrant of the abdomen underneath the diaphragm, and it consists of different lobes. The porta is the gate where blood vessels, ducts, and nerves enter and exit the liver, and your liver will receive arterial blood from the hepatic artery. So here's a look at your liver. Your liver is really important for detoxifying anything harmful in your blood. So it has its own kind of filtration system, I guess you could say. And you can see that here, the hepatocytes are the liver cells. You have a triad, a portal triad that contains a hepatic duct, the hepatic portal vein, and the hepatic artery. And these ducts, eventually you have what we call bile canaliculi, which will produce the bile in the liver that will be stored in the gallbladder. So this takes us through some of that liver anatomy. The lobules are divisions of the liver with the portal triads at the corners. And like I said before, the portal triad contains the hepatic artery, the hepatic portal vein, and the hepatic duct. And the hepatic cords are between the center margins of each lobule, and they're separated by hepatic sinusoids, which are these phagocytic cells that will remove anything foreign from the blood. Then the central vein is at the center of each lobule. It's where the mixed blood flows towards. It will form hepatic veins. The hepatic duct transports bile out of the liver, so bile is created in your liver, and the hepatic duct just transports the bile out of the liver. The common hepatic duct is formed from the left and right hepatic ducts, and then the cystic duct joins the common hepatic duct. Your cystic duct is coming from your gallbladder, where bile will be stored, and the common bile duct is formed from your common hepatic and cystic duct, and the common bile duct will actually take that bile into the small intestine. So what I just described was probably a little confusing. I was describing these ducts that are coming from the liver, and from the gallbladder. So the cystic duct comes from the gallbladder, and the common hepatic duct will come from the liver. Your cystic and common hepatic duct join to form the common bile duct, and that's what will enter the small intestine, the duodenum, at this duodenal papilla. At this duodenal papilla, the pancreatic duct carrying pancreatic enzymes will also empty into the duodenum. The functions of the liver, it has digestive and excretory functions. It stores and processes nutrients. It detoxifies harmful chemicals. It synthesizes new molecules, and it secretes about 700 milliliters of bile each day. And bile is what will dilute and neutralize stomach acid, and bile, it will break down your fats. Here's the control of bile secretion and release by the vagus nerves from the brain. It will be secreted usually after a fatty meal where you need bile to break down the fat in the small intestine. The pancreas then is located posterior to your stomach. Its head is near the midline of the body, and its tail extends to the left and touches the spleen. The endocrine tissues of your pancreas have pancreatic islets that produce insulin and glucagon, and the exocrine tissues produce digestive enzymes that travel through the ducts. The major protein digesting enzymes are trypsin, chymotrypsin, and carboxypeptidase. Pancreatic amylase will continue the polysaccharide digestion of carbohydrates that takes place in the oral cavity. Lipase will help digest lipids, and nuclease enzymes will degrade DNA and RNA to their component nucleotides. So here's a look at the pancreas. Here are cells producing insulin and cells producing glucagon in the pancreatic islets. So this is the endocrine cells. And then here are the exocrine cells, the acidic cells that will secrete different enzymes that will travel through the pancreatic duct into the duodenum. Control of pancreatic secretions. Parasympathetic stimulation causes the pancreas to release a secretion rich in digestive enzymes after a meal. So this will be under parasympathetic control, the rest and digest, and those stimulations will come from the vagus nerve. The large intestine then, its main function is to absorb water from any indigestible food. It contains the cecum, the colon, the rectum, and the anal canal. The cecum is kind of what we call a blind pouch that joins the small intestine at the ileocecal junction. It has an appendix attached. The appendix is about a 9-centimeter long structure. It's often removed if it gets inflamed or is about to burst. Otherwise, there's no known reason for why we have an appendix. The colon, also known as the large intestine, is about 1.5 meters long. It ascends, transverses across the abdomen, descends, and then has a curvy sigmoid region. And then the rectum is the straight tube that begins at the sigmoid region and ends at the anal canal, which is about 2 to 3 centimeters of your digestive tract. Food takes about 18 to 24 hours to completely pass through. Feces is a product of water, indigestible food, and microbes. And the microbes will help synthesize vitamin K. So here's a fun look at the large intestine and underneath a microscope, which I think is kind of fun to see. You can see the sigmoid colon is kind of the curvy portion with the rectum and then the anal canal towards the end. So that is the large intestine. The digestive process starts with digestion, continues on with propulsion, which is the moving of food. Absorption is mainly in your duodenum and jejunum, and then defecation is the medically correct terminology for elimination of waste in the form of feces. So from food, we can break food down into carbohydrates, lipids, or proteins, and then digestive enzymes will continue that breakdown into monosaccharides, fatty acids, monoglycerides, and amino acids. So here's a look at the digestion of carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins, and where digestion of each takes place, and what they're eventually broken down into, and where the majority of that breakdown of each of the three occurs. So kind of a good summary table to take a look at. Carbohydrate digestion is when we have polysaccharides that will split into disaccharides by your salivary and pancreatic amylases. Disaccharides will be broken down into monosaccharides on the surface of your intestines. Glucose will be absorbed by co-transport with sodium into your intestinal epithelium, and then glucose will be carried by the hepatic portal vein to the liver and will enter most cells by facilitated diffusion. So this just shows how glucose gets across the intestinal epithelium and then gets transported through the capillary to the liver. Lipid digestion occurs from lipase, which breaks down triglycerides into fatty acids and monosaccharides. Bile salts surround fatty acids to form micelles, and micelles will attach to the plasma membrane of intestinal epithelial cells, and the fatty acids and monoglycerides will pass by simple diffusion into your intestinal epithelial cells. Lipid digestion within your intestinal epithelial cell, the fatty acids and monoglycerides are converted to triglycerides. Proteins will coat the triglycerides to form chylomicrons, which will move out of your intestinal epithelial cells by exocytosis. And then these chylomicrons will enter the lacteals of the villi in the intestines, and they will be carried through the lymphatic system to the blood. So here's just a look at the transport of lipids across the intestinal epithelium. They're surrounded by bile salts to create this micelle structure, which will then simply diffuse into the epithelial cells, be broken down, and then transported by chylomicrons into the lymphatic system. Lipoproteins, lipids will be packaged into lipoproteins to allow the transport into the lymph and the blood. They will be part water soluble and part lipid soluble. And since lymph and blood contain water and lipids that are not water soluble, lipoproteins are necessary for transport. Lipoproteins include chylomicrons, low density lipoproteins, the LDL, and high density lipoproteins, HDL. So this is a look at a chylomicron with a triglyceride and phospholipid and the cholesterol in the middle, the low density lipoprotein and the high density lipoprotein. Pepsin is a protein digesting enzyme secreted by your stomach. The pancreas secretes trypsin, chymotrypsin, and carboxypeptidase into the small intestine into an inactive state. And in the small intestine, these enzymes will become activated. In the small intestine, other enzymes termed pepsidases will be bound to the microvilli of the intestinal epithelium for further breakdown into small peptides into tripeptides. And absorption of these tripeptides, dipeptides, or individual amino acid will occur through the intestinal epithelial cells by various co-transport mechanisms. So here's a look at how amino acids are transported across the intestinal epithelium and eventually into the blood capillary to the liver for processing. Water and minerals. So water can move across the intestinal wall in either direction. The movement depends on osmotic pressures, and 99% of water entering your intestine will be absorbed back into the water. Minerals, however, are actively transported across the wall of the small intestine. So here's a look at fluid volumes in the digestive tract. If you ingest 2 liters, your salivary gland will secrete 1 liter. Gastric secretions is 2 liters. Pancreatic secretions, bile, small intestine secretions. But with all of that, 92% will be absorbed back into the body in the small intestine. Some will be absorbed in the large intestine, and then about 1% will actually be eliminated as feces. And that's the end of this chapter. We just have one more chapter, which will be on nutrition, and then that'll be the end of this kind of unit. Thanks for listening, guys.